The Great Pyramid of Egypt, a marvel and a mystery. Probably the greatest wonder of the ancient world. It stands today as a monumental landmark. A massive silent sentinel from the long ago past. What is its story? Most Egyptologists believe the Great Pyramid was built by King Khufu as his burial tomb around 2600 BCE. Others believe it was built much earlier by a lost civilization for mysterious purposes. Some consider the incredible skill and synchronicity of measurements relating to the dimensions of the Earth, Sun and Moon, to be beyond human capacity. Some search for codes in its numbers and measurements to prophesy history. Was it a magnificent burial tomb for an ancient Egyptian king? That and many other enigmas surrounding the Great Pyramid are explained in Oahspe, which was first published in 1882. Many details in Oahspe have since been confirmed by more recent discoveries. According to Oahspe, the Great Pyramid was built not as a tomb but a temple, where deep trance adepts were temporarily interred in sarcophagi. Individuals occupied the stone sarcophagi in a type of suspended animation practiced by adepts of the ancient Egyptian cult of Osiris. After perhaps 30 and more days, the adept would revive from his death cast and live to tell of fabulous near-death out-of-body experiences. Moreover, within the pyramid's dark interior chambers, spirits of the dead would appear and communicate with mortals. Spirit messengers would inform guards outside the sealed chambers when to break the seals and restore the returning adepts. Decades ago, experimenting researchers found that pyramids can prolong the freshness of organic matter. This supports hypotheses that pyramids can produce a vortex of energy. We can see how such a power may have augmented the life force of adepts so they could remain in the death cast for relatively long periods of time without serious damage to their flesh. Some well-known persons have attempted to penetrate the mystery of the king's chamber by an overnight stay, including Alexander the Great and Napoleon. Napoleon emerged the following morning visibly shaken, refusing to comment on his experience. Paul Brunton, investigator and writer, also spent a night in the king's chamber in the early 1930s. In the book A Search in Secret Egypt, Brunton recounts his encounter with spiritual presences, and how he was given a sampling of the adept's out-of-body experience. Who built the Great Pyramid? Is there any credence to the theories that the Great Pyramid was designed and built by otherworldly intelligence? According to Oahspe, this is also partly true. The ancient Egyptian king who built the Great Pyramid was an adept who could visit the spirit world while in the death cast. He had the ability to see and hear the spirits of the dead talk with him face to face. His obsessing spirits were Osiris and his angel servant. They gave the adept king instructions for the plan and construction of the Great Pyramid. Thus it was a joint project involving otherworldly overseers advising and instructing a mortal king. Oahspe reveals the name of that ancient Egyptian king as Hojax. He also called himself Thoth-ma. This name literally meant the god Thoth. What prompted Hojax to assume this adopted name? Since he could hear and see spirits of the dead, those who attended him often told him he was the reincarnation of the original Thoth of ages past. Hojax was finally convinced that indeed he was the reincarnation of that ancient deified scribe.
Thoth-ma could hear the gods, and talk understandingly with them. Osiris, through his angel servant god, Egupt, gave Thoth-ma special care, from his youth up. At the age of 16, Thoth-ma passed the examination in the House of Philosophy, and in astronomy and mineralogy. At 17 he passed the Builder's School and the Histories of the Thousand Gods. At 18 he was admitted as an adept in life and death, having power to attain the dormant state, and to see without his mortal eyes, and to hear without his mortal ears. At 19, he ascended the throne at the death of his father and mother. So Osiris, through his servant god, Egupt, spoke to Thoth-ma, saying, my son, my son. Thoth-ma said, I hear you, O god. What do you desire? Osiris said, provide a dark chamber and I will come to you. Thoth-ma provided a dark chamber, and then Osiris through his servant god, came to him, saying, you have great wisdom, but you forget your promise. Thoth-ma said, in what, O god? Osiris said, when you were in heaven, you said, now I will go down to the earth and reincarnate myself, and prove everlasting life in the flesh. For many years Osiris had told this same false thing to Thoth-ma until he believed faithfully he had been so in heaven, returned, and reincarnated himself for such purpose. And he answered Osiris, saying, it seems like a dream to me, even as you speak about it. Tell me, O god, how can a man attain the highest spiritual knowledge? Osiris said, to come and dwell in heaven and see for one's self. Thoth-ma said, if one could leave the corporeal part for 100 days and travel in heaven for that amount of time, would it profit him? Osiris said, to do that, is to master death. You have already attained to power of the dormant state. To control the course of the spirit, that is the next lesson. Thoth-ma said, indeed, O god, I have attained to the power of the dormant state, even as the magicians who submit to burial for 90 days. And I go in spirit from my corporeal part, and see many things, but my soul is like a breath of wind, and goes at random. Osiris said, provide me a temple, and I will come and teach you. Thoth-ma said, how to preserve the body for so long, so that it is not damaged, that is the question. The magicians who have been buried long, upon being dug up and resuscitated, find their bodies so damaged that they die soon after. And have you, O god, a remedy? Osiris said, you shall build a temple of astronomy, and dedicate it to Osiris, savior of men and angels, god of heaven and earth. And it shall be built square with the world, east and west and north and south. And the observing line shall be with the apex of the Hydan vortex, which lies in the median line of the variation of the North Star, 2x, in the form of a pyramid. You shall build it, I will show you every part, measure for measure. And you shall provide such thickness of walls that no sound, heat, or cold can enter it. And you shall provide chambers within, suitable for yourself, your chiefs, and your friends who are also adepts. Yes, they shall come to me on my throne and see the glories I have prepared for them. Nor shall my temple be exclusive, but open to all who will pursue the philosophies of earth and heaven. For which reason, you shall build it in alignment with the sun, moon and stars. And it shall be a testimony to the nations of the earth that you are the highest of all mortals, and first founder of everlasting life in the flesh. As the angels of heaven can return to the earth and take upon themselves corporeal bodies for a season, so shall you master your own flesh to keep it as you will.
Was Thoth-ma that same king whom scholars of Egyptology believe to be King Khufu? The only historical account available comes from Herodotus, written sometime in the 5th century BCE, in his book, An Account of Egypt. He describes Khufu as a cruel tyrant who closed temples and enslaved the people in order to build his pyramid tomb, which took his whole reign of 24 years to build.
Down to the time when Rampsanitos was king, they told me there was in Egypt nothing but orderly rule, and Egypt prospered greatly. But after him, Cheops became king over them and brought them to every kind of evil. For he shut up all the temples, and having first kept them from sacrifices there, he then bade all the Egyptians work for him. So some were appointed to drag stones from the stone quarries in the Arabian mountains to the river Nile, and others he ordered to receive the stones after they had been carried over the river in boats, and to drag them to those which are called the Libyan mountains. They worked by 100,000 men at a time for each 3 months continually. Of this oppression, there passed 10 years while the causeway was made by which they drew the stones. This causeway they built appears to me to be for the pyramid.
Only some of these details match the kingly builder identified in Owaspi. For one, Thoth-ma impressed 200,000 people to build the pyramid and it took 24 years to build. But Thoth-ma built a large number of temples, public monuments, and institutions of learning. This seems to contradict reports of Khufu closing temples, but in Owaspi we can find some parallels to Herodotus's account about Khufu's cruelty and closing temples and restricting worship. For when Thoth-ma enslaved the worshippers of the Great Spirit, he forbade expression of such faith in public. This indeed would have involved closing many temples and houses of worship, for there were 2 million worshippers of the Great Spirit living in Egypt that he enslaved. Many more who would not submit to slavery had been driven out or slaughtered. Some other differences between Khufu and Owaspi's Thoth-ma are that Thoth-ma's reign spanned 80 years and he was known for his great knowledge far and wide. And family details differ. Khufu was believed to have come to the throne some 500 years previously. He followed an older brother at a more mature age. Moreover, one of Khufu's heirs, Khafre, inherited the throne, but Thoth-ma inherited the throne at 19 years old, when his parents died prematurely. His mother was the daughter of the previous king. When Thoth-ma died at 100 years old, the throne was passed to a younger adept, unrelated to the king. He was chosen by priests, claiming he was the transformed form of Thoth-ma, naming him Thoth-ma II. However, Khufu and his heir were also known as Suphis I and Suphis II, and the name Suphis is associated with wisdom and knowledge, as was Thoth-ma. Josephus, the ancient Jewish historian, mentions the name Timaeus. Manetho also mentions the name Thamphis of the 4th dynasty. Both names appear to be Latinized cognates of Thoth-ma. Manetho was quoted by Josephus.
We had formerly a king whose name was Timaeus. In his time, it came to pass, I know not how, that the deity was displeased with us. And invaders came from the east, and when they had the rulers in their hands, they demolished the temples of the gods.
19th century pyramidologist, Joseph Sees, believed that Timaeus of Manetho was the same person as the Chemes of Theodoros, the Cheops of Herodotus, and the Khufu or Suphis of the monuments. Owaspi reveals that not long after the pyramid was built, but after the death of Thoth-ma, foreign kings invaded Egypt. It may be that these kings, once established and Egyptianized, became the dynasties of the Middle Kingdom. Like the later Cleopatra and Greek Ptolemies, who took over from the New Kingdom of Egypt. One of the last rulers of the Old Kingdom was Thoth-ma, but his identity among surviving Egyptian kings lists remains uncertain. Perhaps there is some substance in the stories Herodotus recorded about the builders of the Giza pyramids.
This Cheops, the Egyptians said, reigned 50 years. and after he was dead, his brother Chephren succeeded to the kingdom. This king followed the same manner of dealing as the other, both in all the rest, and also, that he made a pyramid. And Chephren, they said, reigned 56 years. Here then, they reckon 106 years, during which they say that there was nothing but evil for the Egyptians. And the temples were kept closed and not open during all that time. These kings, the Egyptians by reason of their hatred of them, are not very willing to name. Nay, they even call the pyramids after the name of Philides, the shepherd who at that time pastured flocks in those regions.
Manetho's reference to the pyramids named after the shepherd may be a reference to Osiris, whose symbols were the crook and flail. It is little wonder too that the identity of Thoth-ma is so obscured in Egyptian history, for if we take into consideration what Oahspe reveals about the subterfuge of the priests in the case of Thoth-ma II for Thoth-ma I, we have perhaps the beginning of a dynasty that is not based on family inheritance. As well, dates were confused due to a revision of the records at that time. According to Oahspe, in an attempt to bring some order and consensus to earlier Egyptian records, Thoth-ma substituted arbitrary dates and lifespans for ancient personages. This attempt to reconcile dates created even greater confusion, and left the records in a worse state than ever.
Thoth-ma had said to his recorders, in searching for the truth of legends, give the latitude of it. For one legend will say, such a man lived 700 years ago, another legend will say he lived 1050 years ago. The latitude between them is therefore 350 years, which shall be the time of that man's life. And in this way, latitude became confounded with fact, and with no intent to deceive, and behold, it came to pass that the records were worthless.
When was the Great Pyramid built? According to the Oahspe, and the timeline of events in the 2400-year cycle from 3950 to 1550 BCE, the Great Pyramid was built around 1950 BCE, some 400 years before the end of the 2400-year cycle. 1550 was also the end of the Middle Kingdom, which coincided with Pharaoh Ahmose and the expulsion of the Hyksos, also known as the Exodus of the Hebrews. An adjustment to Egyptologists' dating of the Middle Kingdom requires its date to be approximately 230 years later than current Egyptologists allow. The fictitious Second Intermediate Period with its numerous so-called Hyksos pharaohs should be disregarded as legitimate. None of these appear on any reliable kings lists. According to an adjusted timeline based on Oahspe's details of events, the construction of the Great Pyramid in 1950 BCE was about 125 years before the beginning of the Middle Kingdom. According to Egyptologists, between the end of the Old Kingdom and the start of the Middle Kingdom, there was a 100-year period named the First Intermediate Period. This signified a time of instability and change between the two kingdoms. During such time a succession of questionable rulers followed the last king of the Old Kingdom, Pepi II. From Oahspe, we learn that not long after the Great Pyramid was built, Egypt was invaded and sacked by foreign kings.
Moses said, "You do remember, when, in the ancient days great Thoth-ma built the first pyramid. Your forefathers decried the power of heaven, and immediately all the land, and the Great Pyramid itself, was flooded over by evil spirits. And then came foreign kings, who robbed and plundered Egypt. Do not think, O king, these legends are only idle tales. There are gods and lords in heaven who could sweep the sea up, and drown all this country."
What about the construction and use of the Great Pyramid? The awesome expenditure of time, labor and resources that such a project as the Great Pyramid involved, means the motivation to commit to such a monumental goal would have to be strong enough to warrant the cost. Apparently it was. Nothing less than everlasting life in the flesh was promised to Thoth-ma. Young and naive, he trusted and believed his angel guides, carrying through with their instructions for building the temple pyramid. But Thoth-ma's eventual death proved that everlasting life in the flesh was an impossible promise. Nevertheless, the special qualities of the holy chambers of the unique pyramid did preserve the flesh for a short time, enough that adepts, after leaving their physical bodies for weeks at a time, returned to find them well enough preserved and ready for corporeal life again.
During Thoth-ma's reign, more than 4,000 men and 300 women graduated to the rank of adept, all capable of the death trance, and of going about in spirit. And within 30 years, over 700 of these were permitted to test the cast of the holy chambers, in the pyramid. And their spirits were conducted into Osiris's heavenly regions, and sojourned there for many days, and returned to their bodies unharmed. Because of the position of the chambers, there was no action upon their bodies while in the swoon.
Oahspe reveals that instructions for the Great Pyramid's alignment and dimensions were delivered to Thoth-ma by Osiris from the spirit world. Such ability that transcends mortal capacity explains why the Great Pyramid demonstrates such ingenuity, skill and precision, unequaled by any mortal construction, even today.
Osiris said, "You shall build a temple of astronomy, and dedicate it to Osiris, Savior of men and angels, God of heaven and earth. And it shall be built square with the world, east and west, and north and south. And the observing line shall be with the apex of the Hydan vortex, which lies in the median line of the variation of the North Star 2-ax. In the form of a pyramid you shall build it. I will show you every part, measure for measure."
Precise measuring of the Great Pyramid revealed it almost perfectly aligned to north, south, east, and west, with the descending passage pointing toward the north celestial pole, 1/minute of a degree west of true north. Such alignments were described in Oahspe as being requirements for the Great Pyramid, which served also as a temple of astronomy. In Oahspe we find that the observing line is aligned to the apex of the Hydan vortex, being the exact point of the celestial pole. Many scholars believe the Great Pyramid and other pyramids were built with their entrances and descending passages aligned to the North Star. In the Pyramid Age, the North Star was Tuban in the constellation of Draco. Consequently, some scholars try to date the Great Pyramid by when it was aligned exactly to the North Star. One problem with this is that the dates of various alignments vary considerably, without any evidence that any particular date is accurate. Also, because Tuban was only closest to the celestial North Pole position at its lowest culmination, supposedly around 2170 BCE, and from other sources around 2141 BCE, even if either of these two dates were correct, this provides only a small window of time for when it could have been built. 19th century astronomer Richard Proctor believed that the two North Star alignments of the entrance passage and an air shaft in the King's Chamber were required as sites and markers during construction so that the pyramid itself could be built aligned to true north. But this means that the pyramid could only have been built when and if the North Star was exactly at true north. And moreover, there would be problems of obtaining sightings as the construction progressed. Oahspe reveals that Tuban was not exactly true north, and Thoth-ma had to take a median line between Tuban's various positions as it circumnavigated around the ecliptic pole in a 24-hour period. Most scholars also agree with this method of finding true north. Dating of the pyramid is not dependent upon the North Star being exactly at true north. 20th century Egyptologist Zebedee Zaga researched the method of orienting the pyramids.
The initial operation in erecting an important structure in Egypt was the ceremony of stretching of the cord, by which, through the observation of stars with some sort of transit, there was determined the north-south direction. The east-west direction was marked by tracing a perpendicular to the basic line. Since the pyramids were oriented to the north by the observation of stars, the position of the pole must have been obtained by bisecting the angle formed by the two extreme positions of a circumpolar star.
The art of building pyramids and temples was already ancient by Thoth-ma's time. Various skills and knowledge were already accumulated and available. With guidance from Osiris's angel servants, Thoth-ma set about construction the massive monument. He impressed into servitude a large labor force for that purpose, as well as master temple builders whose knowledge went back more than 1,000 years to the ancient lodges and guilds of Anubi.
The fourth degree of Anubi taught the arrangement of the heavens, the places of the sun, stars and moon, the places and grades of the unseen worlds, the localities of the lower and higher heavens, the key to the place of the North Star, the position of the Earth's vortex, the vortices that move the corporeal worlds and hold them in place, and the rules for building temples and pyramids, with their spirit chambers.
To extract the participation and labor of enough skilled and unskilled workers, Thoth-ma was ordered by the angels of Osiris to enslave the people who worshipped the unseen Great Spirit and forcefully expel those who would not be subdued. The descendants of those who remained became known in later generations as the Hebrews, who were liberated from slavery and led out of Egypt by Moses around 1550 BCE.
Osiris then instructed King Thoth-ma to drive out of the land of Egypt all the faithists who could not be made slaves of, especially the shepherd kings. Thoth-ma impressed an army of 200,000 warriors, and drove off the shepherd kings, putting to death more than 300,000 of them. And he took from the faithists all their possessions, such as houses and lands, and did not allow them to hold any mortal thing in possession, neither permitting them to till the soil, except as servants, nor to engage in any other labor except as servants. And to escape the tyranny of Thoth-ma, there went out of the land of Egypt 3 million faithists, including the shepherd kings, the unlearned. And in regard to the faithists who remained in the land of Egypt, Osiris, through King Thoth-ma, made the following laws. You shall not possess any land, house, ox or any beast of burden, nor cow, nor shall your people possess an altar of worship, temple, or place of sacred dance, but you shall be a servant and a servant of servants all the days of your life. But in your sleeping place, and in the sleeping place of your family, you shall do worship in your own way. You shall not openly profess your doctrines, under penalty of your blood and your flesh, and you shall no longer teach in the schools or colleges, nor shall your children receive great learning. And of your arts, of measuring and working numbers, you shall no longer keep them secret, or your blood shall be upon you. And if you say, Behold, the Great Spirit, or Jehovah, the ever-present, you shall suffer death, and your wife and your children with you. And if a man questions, to try you, asking, Who created the world? You shall answer, Behold, God. And if he asks further, Do you think the Creator is ever present? You shall say, No, he is like a man who has finished his labor, he sits on his throne in heaven. And if he asks you further, Where is God? You shall answer, On the mountain Horeb, in heaven. And if he asks you still further, Is the ever-present a person? You shall say, No, the ever-present is void like the wind. There is only one ruler in heaven and earth, even Osiris, who is Lord the God, Savior of men. Whoever does not do these things shall be put to death. "Whoever does not bow to Thoth-ma, my earthly ruler, shall not live," says the god, Osiris. These laws were entered in the libraries of Egypt, and also proclaimed publicly by the scribes and seers. And yet even with these restrictions on them, more than 2 million faithists remained in the land of Egypt.
Owaspi described the organization of workers on the pyramids before Egyptologists knew about how the workers were organized, including the division, specialization and management of labor. Since Owaspi's first publication in 1882, workers' villages and quarters at several pyramid sites have been excavated. Egyptologists discovered that workers on the pyramid were well organized in specialized groups, with leaders and overseers. Because of these recent discoveries, Egyptologists now believe that slaves were not employed to build the Great Pyramid, but rather paid workers skilled in various crafts. But this assumes a slave population must be starved, unruly and unskilled. Owaspi descriptions reveal that the faithist slaves impressed to build the Great Pyramid had only recently been enslaved for that purpose. They were not the offspring of generations of degraded and deprived slaves. Many of them had been educated in skills and knowledge that even the ancient Egyptians coveted. And, the builder of the Great Pyramid, Thoth-ma, knew that an efficient workforce required a certain standard of living.
And it came to pass that Thoth-ma began the building of the Temple of Osiris, and he impressed 200,000 men and women in the building of it, of which number more than 1/2 were faithists. And these laborers were divided into groups of 12s and 24s and 48, and so on. And each group had a captain. But for groups of 1,728 men and women, there was one general, and for every 6 generals there was one marshal, and for every 12 marshals there was one chief, and these chiefs were of the privy council of the king. And the king allotted a separate work to every chief, some to dig canals, some to quarry stone, and some to hew the stones, some to build boats, some to provide rollers, and others timbers, and yet others capstans.
What about method and materials? Scholars have long pondered the method of procuring and transporting the enormous heavy rocks. They have sought the ancient quarries of limestone and granite, and surmised the forests of timber by which floats and ramps were built. They have tried to determine what kind of tools, ramps and pulleys were used so efficiently and expertly. Owaspi presents details of all these ponderables.
In 2 places the surveyors found stone with which to build the temple. One was above the banks of the great river, Egan, at the foot of Mount Hazikah, and the other was across the plains of Neuf, in the mountains of Aqaba. From the headwaters of Egan, a canal was made, first to Aqaba, and from there it descended by locks to the plains of Neuf, and then on to Gakir, the place chosen by the king for the temple to be built. And as for the logs used in building, they were brought down the waters of Egan, from the forests of Gambotha, and Rugzak. These logs were tied together and floated on the water to the place required, where by means of capstans, they were drawn out of the water ready for use. The stones of the temple were hewn in the region of the quarries, and when properly dressed, they were placed on slides by capstans, and then, by capstans, let down the mountainsides, to the water, upon which they were to float to the place required for them. The floats were made of boards sawn by men skilled in the work, and were of sufficient length and width to carry the burden they were designed for. And at the bottom of the floats were rollers, gudgeoned at the ends. Now when a stone was let down from the place of its hewing onto the float, it was ready to be carried to its destination. And when the float arrived near Gakir, ropes, made of hemp and flax, were fastened to the float, and by means of capstans on the land, the float was drawn up an inclined plane out of the water, the rollers of the float answering as wheels. When all things were ready for building the temple, the king himself, being learned in all philosophies, proceeded to lay the foundation, and to give instructions as to the manner of building it. These were the instruments used by the king and his workmen. The gower, which was a triangle with a plumb line for finding, for example, the level and elevation angles. And there was the length, the square, the compass, and the plumb and line. Nor were there any other instruments of measure or observation used in the entire building of the temple. And as to the measure called a length, it was the average length of a man, after measuring 1,000 men. This length was divided into 12 parts, and these parts again into 12 parts, and so on. After the first part of the temple was laid, the builders of the inclined plane began to build it, also, but it was built of logs. And when it was raised a little, another layer of the temple was built. Then again the inclined plane was built higher, and another layer of the temple built, and so on. Thus the inclined plane, which was made of wood, was built up as the temple increased in height. The width of the inclined plane was the same as the width of the temple, but the whole length of the inclined plane was 440 lengths. The floats carrying the stones were drawn up this inclined plane by means of capstans, and by men and women directly pulling also. Thoth-ma spent 24 years building the temple, and then it was completed. But it required another half a year to take away the inclined plane used in building it. After that, it stood free and clear, the greatest building that had ever been built on the earth, or ever would be. Such, then, was Thoth-ma's temple of Osiris, the Great Pyramid.
According to Oahspe, Thoth-ma had canals built to transport stone from two sources. Surviving historic accounts document Pepi I as the first king to dig a canal in Upper Egypt. The canal was used to transport granite for pyramids and obelisks. This detail further adds weight to Thoth-ma being a later king than Khufu, or alternatively Khufu's time is incorrectly dated by Egyptologists, or perhaps Khufu's various names may have been mistaken for separate individual kings.
The first major shipping canal was constructed under Pepi I, when the rocks of the first cataract of the Upper Nile were pierced. Blocks of granite and obelisks were transported downriver on sizable ships. The canal had a length of 90 meters, was 10 meters wide and 9 meters deep, carved through granite.
How were the gigantic blocks moved from the river to the pyramid? All the large stone blocks would have been pulled up to the height of the building in progress, along an extended building ramp which stretched perhaps half a mile out toward the canal. The blocks were winched out of the river on their floats which had rollers beneath them, onto an inclined ramp.
During the construction of the Giza pyramids, a canal was excavated leading to a depression near the pyramids, which could be used as a port for unloading the granite blocks shipped downriver. The water level in all these canals fluctuated greatly, being dependent on the level of the Nile. They therefore did not construct quays, but beached the boats on the gentle slope of the basin in order to discharge their cargoes.
As described in Oahspe, a British television history documentary describes a lengthy causeway as a ramp from dock to pyramid.
It is also possible that the causeways stretching from Pyramid to Valley Temple might originally have served as builders' ramps from quay to construction site, the quay being connected with the Nile by canal.
Once the temple was completed, Thoth-ma and his priests took turns in the death cast, and returned, relating experiences of the spirit world. Moreover, once the pyramid itself was complete, Osiris had Thoth-ma construct additional superstructures to it.
Osiris said, "Behold, I will bring back many who are already dead, and they shall call to their embalmed bodies and wake them up, and inhabit them. Go, then, to the root of the matter, and prepare my people, for I will come in person and inhabit the temple you have built, and my heavenly kingdom shall descend to the earth. Therefore, prepare the column of the stars. Thoth-ma built a column to the east line of the slat, 7 lengths, approximately 35 to 40 feet. And the height was 36 lengths, approximately 180 to 200 feet. Of wood and stone he built it, with an opening from the bottom to the top, and the width of the opening was 6 lengths, approximately 30 to 34 feet. In its walls was a winding stairway, and there were windows looking out to the east and west, and north and south, so that the stars from every quarter could be observed. On the summit of the column were dwelling places for the seers and mathematicians, with places for the measuring instruments and lenses.
There is evidence that constructions were attached to the pyramid. Remaining foundations of outer walls close to the base of the pyramid on the north, south and west side still exist. On the east side appears to be the remains of a building. Egyptologists believe these are the remains of a low enclosing wall around the pyramid, with a large unusual mortuary temple on the east side of it. A 4 by 10 feet stone found by the north wall also supports evidence of an adjoining structure on the northeast side of the north wall, as described in Oahspe.
About 70 feet along the north side of the Great Pyramid, from the northeast corner, is a 4 by 10 foot stone sunk into the foundation at an angle. The joints are very precise, and this is the only stone in the foundation perimeter not at a right angle to normal construction. It would have been covered by the casing stones but is now accessible, since they are gone. It is very likely an entrance.
These descriptions of remnants of unusual building foundations support details laid out in Oahspe regarding the double-column observatory. What you see is a depiction of an ancient star and sun observatory from Oahspe. Structures similar to these were built onto and adjacent to the Great Pyramid on its north wall. A stairway also led to the top of the pyramid. Are there hidden codes of prophecy in the measurements and numbers of the pyramid? Perhaps. Prophecy by numbers and cyclic occurrences was Thoth-ma's forte. Oahspe reveals that Thoth-ma's gathering of knowledge for prophecy, including predicting periods of drought extended to regions far beyond Egypt's borders, was one of the oldest monolithic sites in England, one of Thoth-ma's outposts.
Stonehenge is a very sophisticated standing stone circle. It contains the sum total of knowledge found upon the pyramids of Giza. Its pedigree is indelibly linked back to those magnificent structures. Whoever built Stonehenge was utterly conversant with the age-old mathematical formulas, geodetic navigational systems, astronomical methodologies, and measurement standards found upon the Giza Plateau of ancient Egypt.
In 1956, Professor Atkinson, archaeologist, outlined a schema of 3 phases of development. The first phase ranges from 1900 to 1700 BCE. Although scholars give different dates for the 3 phases, the earliest, 3500 BCE, is still within the range of when there were sophisticated celestial observations in prehistoric cultures. According to Oahspe, from around 3900 to 3700 BCE, there was a renaissance of such knowledge in many places around the world. According to Martin Daughtry, maintenance and replacement of organic materials such as wooden posts would explain more recent radiocarbon dates, implying that Stonehenge was a functional observatory from its inception. Thoth-ma gathered an enormous amount of information intent on compiling a prophetic table of events that would span 3,300 years. His belief that he would attain everlasting life in the flesh as promised by his angel guides is attested to in the remarkably solid and sustaining manner in which the pyramid was built. It was intended to last forever, and is still standing intact more than 3,500 years later.
And Osiris commanded the king to send his wisest mathematicians into the distant lands of the earth, to observe the winds of heaven, and the drought upon the earth, and the abundance of the yield of the earth, in different regions, in different years and seasons, and to observe famines and pestilences, and all types of occurrences on the face of the earth. He said to the king, when your mathematicians have returned to you with their accumulated wisdom, you, or your successor, shall examine the sun, stars and moon, and compare them to the things that the mathematicians shall relate, 1 year with another, and 3 years with another 3 years, and 5 with 5, and 7 with 7, and so on for hundreds of years, and thousands of years. And when you have taken in the term of 3,300 years, and compared the sun, moon and stars, as they relate to the occurrences of the earth, you shall have the key of prophecy for 3,300 years ahead. And you shall say of this land and of that land, and of this people and that people, how it will be with them, and you shall not err. And they went throughout Arabinia, Vindu, Japheth, Parsi, Helist, and Europa, even across to the great western sea, and to the southern extreme of Arabinia, and to the great kingdoms in the interior, and to the north of Helist, Parsi, and Japheth, to the regions of everlasting snow. Thoth-ma had these things rewritten and condensed into books, and named them books of great learning, and they were deposited within the south chamber of the pyramid, where harm could never come to them.
According to Oahspe, the temple pyramid also served as a great library. Where then are the chambers in which this vast amount of knowledge was stored? Until recently only those chambers which could be accessed from the north entrance and connecting passageways were known of. In the late 20th century, various investigators with high-tech sounding equipment revealed numerous large cavities.
A team of French engineers, in the late 1980s, found a mysterious cavity behind the masonry of the corridor leading to the Queen's chamber. A fiber optic camera was inserted, and showed the cavity empty of treasure, but half full of sand, which upon testing proved to be radioactive.
Were such spaces once chambers used by the ancient builders? Were they emptied and filled with sand by the same people who plugged up the king's chamber with huge granite plugs? Was it necessary to keep out the unworthy and uninitiated? What of the synchronicity of the Great Pyramid with the Sun, Moon and Earth? Some researchers have calculated that the Great Pyramid is placed in the center of the land mass of Earth. Oahspe reveals that the pyramid was built at the center of the Earth in time, that is at the midpoint of Earth's lifespan.
Jehovah had said, suffer them to build this, for the time of the building is midway between the ends of the earth, and now is the extreme of the earth's corporeal growth, so let it stand as a monument of the greatest corporeal aspiration of man. From this time forward, man shall seek not to build himself everlastingly on the earth, but in heaven. And these things shall be testimony, that in the corporeal age of the earth, man was of like aspiration, and in the spiritual age of man, in an opposite condition of corporeal surroundings, for by the earth I prove what was, and by man prove what the earth was and is at certain periods of time.
The Earth-Moon relationship is unique in the solar system. It contains the golden section ratio that squares the circle. Also, the Moon and the Sun appear to be the same size, most clearly visible during an eclipse. This too is only seen by looking from the surface of the Earth. Squaring the circle was found to be mathematically impossible in the 19th century. Pi is irrational and therefore cannot be exactly measured. But the Earth, the Moon and the Great Pyramid come very close to the solution. If the base of the Great Pyramid is equated with the diameter of the Earth, then the radius of the Moon can be found by subtracting the radius of the Earth from the height of the pyramid. There are many more such synchronicities, and probably many more mysteries hidden in the depths of the Great Pyramid. Even so, Oahspe has lifted the veil on the foundation of its existence. How long will the pyramid continue to stand? Certainly longer than any other structure built by man, even to this day.